Hey guys, this is Eric Weingarten with Weingarten Racing. This is the video that's probably either going to make you very happy, very sad, or very angry. This is the small block Chevy I had intended to blow up. Now, I'm going to save you the suspense. It didn't blow up, but it did make lots of power. I'm going to talk about all the specs and what happened in this video. First and foremost, this is Gary Dunsworth. He owns Dunsworth Machine in Enid, Oklahoma. He's the one that put this engine together. He created this mighty mouse. Before I tell you the specs on this engine, I want you to keep this in mind whenever you're listening to the specs. Most of these parts are not the most ideal if you were to really try to do it the correct way. When this engine came to be, the idea was I want to see how much power an engine would make before it expires, a stock small block Chevy. So with that in mind, we didn't put the best of it in because we kind of had figured this thing was going to expire, which it didn't. So here's the rundown of what's in it, and hopefully that explains why we used some of what we did. The block, it's a 350 block, 4-bolt main. It still uses the stock main bolts. There's no ARP main bolts or studs, stock bolts. The crankshaft is a stock cast crankshaft. It's not a forged one, it's a stock cast one. It's also turned 1010, and it's used. So at 1010 it was used. He just polished up and put it in. They did Magnaflux at first to make sure there wasn't any cracks, which there wasn't. The rods are from a GM 604 crate engine. So they're the powered metal rods, but they do have ARP through bolts on the rods, and they're the 3/8 ones. The pistons are a Mahl forged flat top that are also used. Because the block was bored 40 over, these pistons have 4 valve reliefs, so not the good 2 valve relief ones. These are made for a replacement for the 604 crate engines and circle track. So they're not made really for power adder either. The rings that are on it, and I'll show you a picture real quick of the rods and pistons together. We just reused the rings. We didn't even put new rings in it. Speaking of bearings, the bearings, they're P-series bearings. For those that don't know anything about engines, there's a P bearings or the stock replacement bearings. You then have your race bearings, which are H bearings. These are P bearings. And I asked Gary why he did that. He's going, well, they're cheaper, one, and also stock replacement stuff. That's perfectly okay. As far as ring gap, I told him to open it up to 60, and he goes, I go, well, what did you end up with? And he goes, I put them in there, and they were huge. I didn't really measure them, but it was huge. So if he says they're huge, it was probably around 40. So we reused that. The lifters themselves, those are solid roller lifters, but they're from different other blown up engines that he just happened to have. The camshaft came from Daniel Powell. And this is the other thing. So don't think Daniel Powell spec'd this cam wrong. He didn't. I asked Daniel Powell, hey, do you have a cam that I could use for an engine that would blow up? And he said, yes, I do. And he sent this camshaft. Now, he even said this isn't, don't take it wrong with him because that's not fair to him. He just sent in a camshaft to use for this, knowing that this was going to expire. If he was to do it again, he would spec it totally different, guaranteed, because this is just what he had. So I don't want you beating up on Daniel Powell. Trust me, if he had all the specs and everything in a new cam core, this would be different. But regardless, it made a lot of steam. And I'm going to show you the specs as soon as I get done jabbering on this thing. As far as the heads, they're the AFR Enforcer heads. These are the ones I used on the small block Chevy 406 Dyno Mule. If you recall, the last time I used them, I had ported just the exhaust ports because I'd done a test on the 406 to see what would happen if you just port the exhaust ports. So that's the only thing that's done on the heads. The intake ports are completely stock. The chamber's about 66 cc's, so the final compression ratio, because the pistons are 5 thousandths in the hole and 41 thousandths MLS head gasket, 66 cc chamber, it's 9.83 compression. And that's the engine, and here's what it does in A. This is the carburetor that we used for all of the boost testing. This is a blow-through 650 CFM methanol ATM carburetor. As you can tell, it's got the dual needle and seat bowls. And I will say this, ATM was nice enough to let me borrow this piece. So this piece is being sent back. So this may kind of hold up future testing because I don't own this carb. But I'm extremely thankful to them, because without that blow-through methanol carburetor, this test couldn't have taken place either, because I do have a blow-through gas carburetor, but I'm not even going to pretend on this video that we could have made even close to the same power on gas. Without this carburetor, this test couldn't have happened. So big thank you to ATM and the guys there. Before we did any boost pulls, we made a pull with that ATM methanol carburetor NA just to see how the fuel curve looks. And this is the power it made with this methanol carburetor. I'll go ahead and tell you this, it was insanely rich, and not a fault to ATM at all, because they built this for going with boost. And I will say the air-fuel ratio got better and better as the more boost we added to it. I could have changed jets and fixed this at any time, but it seemed, especially on the NA side, it seemed extremely pointless because we'd had to change it back once we got to boost. So even though it says $4.99, which it did jump up from the gas one, and even at 9.83 compression, by the way, that's a pretty good jump for just really, really rich. Just to give you an idea how rich, typically, now this is the gas scale, you'd be like 12.5, 12.8 to 1. This was 10.8 on the gas scale. So rich, there's no way around it, NA. So if we did some more stuff, probably could have got around 5, 10, 20 maybe-ish. Even with this low compression for methanol, it's pretty good. But now the fun begins. Go ahead. This is the first supercharger we started with. This is the Torque Storm 75 millimeter. Now this one I actually just took off my S10 because this is what I use when I race or drive around town or anything. I have this on it. So I've had this for a while. Torque Storm did not give me the supercharger either. Don't get that idea either. I think when I bought this new a few years ago, they used to have lifetime warranty on them. That's the reason why it had the biggest selling point to me, because I heard other superchargers were failing. But this one was, at the time, the whole kit was $2,800, which is, to me, seemed like a great deal, right? So I don't know what they retail for now. And yes, I paid retail. But this is an 8-rib design. And I mean, it's a small deal. They claim like this is made to make, I think they said 670, about where this thing should land. That's where they're kind of rated to. It's just because it's kind of smaller, right? So on the S10, just to give you an idea, it's a 406, cubic inch engine. It only makes 7 pounds of boost, right? But on the 350 that you're about to see, it makes 10. But I'm gonna go ahead and tell you how we started, just in case you ever wanna do some tuning stuff on this. Because all this had, stock block, crank rods, all that stuff, right? We don't wanna lose it because of a bad tuning deal. So the air-fuel ratios are way rich, like I said, 10.9. Having too rich can be dangerous too, but it's better to be rich, and then if we had to change. But we also started way low on timing. So the first hits with this were 18 degrees of timing. That's super conservative, because even in the truck, I think I have it at 23. So that's the most I have it. So what we started doing after that, I'm going to show you Dyno sheets so you can kind of see, but we went 18 degrees, we went up to 20 degrees, and it gained like 70 horsepower. I think even more than that. So I think it was 90. So that says it likes more timing. It also seemed like we were running cooler. We had another 2 degrees and it went up another 40. We went up 1 more degrees and it didn't gain hardly anything. What this one ends up maxing out with, I'm going to show you right now so you can see exactly how much power this maxed out at. Now, I'm going to tell you this too, because this is very important. Never touch the jetting on the carburetor, ever. Not through this entire video will you see us ever touch the jetting, because of a couple things. One, I borrowed the carburetor, so I kind of wanted to leave it as much alone as I could, but also, if it's rich, I can live with it, because I knew as the boost levels goes up, and here's something else for you guys who are getting into this, as you add advanced timing, so if you give it more timing, if the mixture's rich and you add timing, it typically leans it out. because it gives more time to burn more of the fuel. Your mixture becomes leaner. So even though it was rich, if you add timing, it's going to get leaner, which it was, but it wasn't getting anywhere. It's still about a half a point from where I really would like it to be with this supercharger. So could I have made more than what I did with this one? Yes, we could have probably added 1 more degree and taken out it, but the tuning window would have got smaller. And besides, it's not where we wanted to go. We wanted to find out what's the max power this stock block could make, and we're getting close to the end. So that's the reason why we stopped with this one and switched to the big one. But let me go ahead and show you the power that this thing actually did do. 765 is a lot of power, so really good power on this small block with that blower. But if you remember, and you've been a subscriber of mine for quite a while, I got that blower 3 or 4 years ago when the TU's on my 406 that went in the S10, and Nyes was dynoing it. When we were at Nyes dynoing it, it made 765, and that 406 is much better stuff. But it had the torque storm hat on it as opposed to, and this is something I need to talk to you about. Probably the reason why this blow-through carburetor works so well was 2 things. One, I have a Holley hat that's on the top, but if you look underneath it, there's a 2-inch spacer. So those vent tubes on the carburetor are actually below that spacer. So the air coming in is hitting those right away. There's no vents that's sticking out and going forward. That seemed like it made a big difference. So that was probably worth a lot of power that I never tested on the 406. So, but regardless, what I'm trying to say is that blower really is kind of maxed out there without changing the pulley, because I had left on the 3.25 pulley. What I should have done, but we just didn't, is this is the smaller pulley. This is a 3.1. You could have changed that on that smaller blower and made some more power. I don't know how much more. Instead, what we did is we changed to this one. So this is the Torque Stormer 85 millimeter. I bought this about a year ago. Now, I think when I paid for it, it was about $3,800 just for the blower. So the benefit for this one, in case you're wondering, is yes, it's much bigger, but it also fit in the same bracketry and used everything that I had. So there was no other brackets I needed to buy or anything else that went with it. You could just bolt it in. It's also an 8-rib. So we got to test that. And I want to also point out about the air filter, though. This is an interesting thing. So I've got the air filter, obviously it bolts to the back. And one of the things I did with the small supercharger, we tested it with and without the air filter. And oddly enough, the air filter was worth, having it off was worth about 20. But then Gary's like, I don't think I got full throttle on that because his linkage was acting up. We tried it again. It made no difference. So first time, but the throttle wasn't all the way. It looked like it was gaining a lot not having it on. But when they got that working right, there was no difference. Like, it was 10 foot-pounds of torque, 0 difference in horsepower. So having the air filter on is going to stay on. Now, there could be a couple reasons for that too, and if you watch the video, you'll see. By chance, he put the valve cover that has the breather right there. It's on. So the engine's here. You'll see in the picture. Look for where the breather is. So it's shooting out air, and this is sucking it in. So there's some oil that was getting in here. So having the filter on probably helped that. So maybe that had a part to it, but I'm just bringing it up in case you want to know. But I'm going to go ahead and tell you this. When the 85 millimeter went on, everybody in the room, myself, Tony, and Gary, really thought this is the end of the motor. Right when we go making this pull, it's over. But a couple things. Again, we did just like we did with the small blower. We started with 18 degrees of timing. So nothing's hardly in it, and we'll go from there and see what's happening. Let the power tell us what the timing should be, not what we think the timing should be. So here's the first pull. So 859 horsepower, 735 foot-pounds of torque. Now, we did change some things from the way we did a pull from the small blower to the big blower. On the small blower, we're starting to pull at 4,500. Once we switched to the bigger blower, we switched it to starting at 5,000 RPMs, and we were ending at 6,500. Later on, we go to 7. But that's the range that we're running in. So at 18 degrees, and you could hear it, I don't know how well you can hear it on the video, but it's kind of popping there at the end. And the reason goes back to what I said before. Again, we didn't change any jet on the carburetor. Still, when this went on, we're watching the air-fuel ratio closely. And you don't see it on your screen. It's not there. We're actually watching the actual O2 sensor. And it's getting better. So it was, when we first started, it was like 10.3s with the smaller blower. Once the bigger one got on, now we're at like 10.8, 10.9, all right? So we're still really rich. And remember, that's on the gasoline scale. So it's that way, but at 18 degrees. So just like we did before, we're gonna add 2 degrees to it and see what would happen. And this is what happens. It made 900. 912, 650. 900, over 900. I didn't think it was going to live this far. I really didn't. I thought we were going to break the crank snout and it was going to send things flying by now. Nope. And if you go back and watch 30 seconds, rewind 30 seconds and watch that pull again, because you'll see Gary. I think Gary thought for sure this thing was going to end too, because you see him putting it in and you see him kind of sliding out of the way like he's thinking, this thing's going to let go right in my face. But it didn't. Everything looked good. And if you look at the graph, it's like this. So it's still climbing with the RPM. So we were only going to 6,500 RPM, so we could have gone higher and probably made more. But that was just a 2 degree timing change. So since it gained more than 50, let's just add 2 more degrees and see what happens. Well, when we did, we go from 912 to 936. So that's not a lot of gain, right? You got to listen to what the engine is telling you. The engine is telling you that's all the timing I'm really needing. So since it didn't really change that much up to 936 with the 2 degrees, I thought, well, let's try something else. You know, it's working pretty good. And by the way, some of you are like, did you pull a plug yet? Nope. Speaking of spark plugs, those are used spark plugs. So those AFR Enforcer heads that he took off the 406 that are on this engine, they had the same spark plugs that were in that engine. They're an NGK7. He didn't change them. He's like, well, this is going to blow up anyway. I was like, okay. So eventually we will pull a plug, and I'll show you a picture in this video, but nope. Like, you just listen to the engine. The engine will tell you. You just have to know what it's saying. Speak its language. But anyway, I thought, well, let's just take off the air filter, maybe with this big one on. Because remember, I started with the air filter on as a way to kind of limit the power of the supercharger. So it'd have some kind of control, a little bit more control. We take it off, and guess what? It makes 936. It didn't make any difference having the air filter on or off. Now, the torque did come up having it off, though. But at that point, it was like, we're there, right? So what do? You add RPM to 7,000 RPM we go. Well, we made less power, 897. You might say how? Well, it turns out Gary forgot to turn on the fan for the room. You see, he opened the vent but forgot to turn on the fan. So what happened was all that fumes in that room were being sucked in by the supercharger. It was getting no fresh air because the room was being filled with those vapors. So in case you're wondering how much horsepower can you lose from the bad air, well, it turns out you can lose a lot. From a 936 to 830 or 897, almost 40. Not to mention, you know the air is bad because this is the next sound we kept hearing. It was the carbon monoxide sensor in our room, not in the dyno cell. That's the beeping. This just happened to be a generic smoke alarm. I just used it for a picture. But that's the beeping you heard in the live feed, was the carbon monoxide saying, hey, danger, you guys are going to die, air out the place. So, yeah, it hurt power and probably didn't do so well for our lives either. But progress must go on. So this is the supercharger bracket setup. You've noticed you've got a point A and a point B. Right here's where the tensioner sits. I've removed it so you can see what I'm talking about. You might say, what's this bolt for? This actually goes into the bracket that holds it onto the head. There's a bolt hole that goes through here that holds one part of the belt tensioner. And you've got 2 points, so you can either slide it to B or to A. We had it at B, and if you look at it, it rotates it this way. Since the belt's here, it rotates it this way, and there's less tension on the belt. That's how you had to use it for the 3.25 pulley, because, and by the way, this is actually very clever. I have to give them credit for that. Very, very clever. But you have to have it at B, because if you tried on A on the 325, you could not have gotten the belt on. So what you do, once the smaller pulley went on, we had left it at B, and just put it on and didn't think anything about it. So this is the pull that it does with the B. So it sounds like the belt's slipping. Oh my gosh, it's bad. Well, there's a couple things too, in case you ever want to change these. If your blower's hot, in other words, you've got some runs on it, you probably could pull this pulley off pretty easy. This is a normal thread, so you can use it, hold that, or just use an impact and off that goes. There are 2 keyways in here on each side. If the pulley is warm or the supercharger is warm, this whole thing, what we found out anyway, loosen that, it'll slide right off. However, the new pulley will not go on. And the reason why is because it was cold. So Gary goes and heats it up and it slides right on, tighten that down, everything's good. However, this was still warm when that belt went back on. So we're at the wrong spot because we're at B and we should have been at A. So when I'm talking about belt slip, that's the reason. Hot pulley, like super hot, and we're on the wrong one. So this is what it does. All right. So yeah, there was belt slip, but that was user error. That's us. We had it on B. So all we did now was very simple. No special stuff. This is still an 8-rib deal too. No special stuff. No bees, wees, special sticky wax. None of that crap. You just moved it to A. That's all we did. You just loosen this, slide out, put the pin that was in the tensioner into A, retighten it, put the belt back on. Boom, and it does this magical number. That broke 1,000. That's right, 1,056 at 7,000 RPM. Could have gone more, higher RPM and made more. 834 foot-pounds of torque. Stock block, stock crank, stock rods. There you go. As far as boost, this is 19.3 pounds of boost. So quite a bit, because boost members are, it's a measurement of restriction. So if the heads and stuff moved more air, the boost would have gone down. So, or a better engine, bigger engine, so on and so forth. So quite a bit of boost that this thing makes, but it's because of the engine itself. So really good power, and it's still together. So people don't think I'm making it up. That's the block. 010, there's your part numbers, GM. Torque Storm 85 millimeter supercharger. The smaller pulley is what took to do that. It does take, by the way, just for the record, if you do this, this is a Dyno electric water pump because it has to clear this. They have make the longer one that works on my S10, but this probably took less tension on the crank. By the way, this thing's still alive. That's the AFR 4811 intake, ATM, blow-through 650 carburetor. Daniel Powell's cam, and he didn't spec it for the blower. I said, you got something you don't mind getting rid of that was probably going to just get broke? He said, sure. So he sent a 252, 260 something. I'll show the specs later. About a 630 lift with 1.6 rockers. The compression ratio on this comes out to about 9.8. We recalculated it today because they zero decked 41 thousandths MLS, 4-valve relief, Mahl forged piston replacement for the 604 crate engines, the powder metal rod from the 604 crate engine, ARP rod bolt on that, stock cast crank. This is a 4-bolt main block. This is the part that made it almost unusual, but he said, God dang, this methanol is killing me. But right underneath there, which you can't see because of lighting, I guess there's a crack, but it's probably usable. And this is the regulator we use for it, and everything seems fine. So can't make 1,000 on the stock block 350 crank and rods. That's lies. I think to go further, we're going to have to put turbos on it because I'm out of the supercharger. That's all this baby's got. So. Well, now that that's done, I guess that dispels the myth that a stock block, stock crank, stock rod, small block Chevy can't stand 1,000 horsepower. I don't blame people for believing that, because I'll be quite honest with you, I thought the same thing. Because, like most of you, we hear so much on the internet, and if you hear enough of it, it almost makes you think it's real. Like someone must have proved it, and that's the reason why people keep saying this. Most of the dyno testing I do are to kind of prove or disprove the myths that are being said. So I didn't know how this was going to go. Because in all fairness, the last time I'd ever heard that statement came from David Vizard book when he said the max you could make with the stock small block was 1,000. Now, I don't know. I really don't. Now, I also know as I'm saying this that people are typing in the comments and saying, well, that's just, you just did a few dyno pulls, that's not really a count. Here's your few dyno pulls. We were not easy on this motor, and I said this from the beginning, I was trying to make an engine to find out how much power it took before it broke. And I know people are mad because I said at the beginning of this video, there are probably going to be several people mad that I didn't break the engine. The goal wasn't necessarily to break the engine, it was to see how much power the engine could make before it broke. Unfortunately, this is the biggest supercharger I have to see how much power it could have made. And it did really well because after all, Torqstrom only rates these to 950 horsepower. I'm 100 over that. I'm sorry it didn't break. For those that wanted to see carnage. Because I really think if had it broke, I'd probably have more views. I don't have an answer on how much power this stuff really will take. All I know is that it took 1,056. I will caution you, because I'm sure it's already in the comments, I don't know how long it can keep doing this. We made a total of 19 pulls, and I think 14 of them were under boost. At least 7 were over 900 horsepower. So it's not like it was just a few runs, like 2 and we're done, just to prove it. It was a bunch. So the next thing is LS guys. LS guys, I want you to understand this. The week before, I was on that same dyno with a 408 LS, fuel injected, F1A94. It made 1,021. And if you just heard those two comments, you're like, ooh, small block Chevy for the win. They're much better. The problem again with the internet is you're trying to compare way different combos. That combo, even though it had way better parts, its blower had a lot more to go, and it could have made substantially more. Could have the same thing happened with the small block Chevy? I don't know. But the point is, you shouldn't be comparing those type of stories. And that's the problem with a lot of LSs. You're like, somebody went to the junkyard and they got this and they put turbos on it. Turbos aren't superchargers. It takes almost 200 horsepower to run this. So if we're actually going, well, how much power did the engine really make? The engine probably made 1,200, but this was robbing 200 away. I would love to see how much power this engine makes, but I do have a pair of these turbochargers. Those are 78, 75 VS Racing turbos. I've got a pair of them. I think single, they're supposed to make about 800 horsepower. Together, they're supposed to be 1,600 horsepower. That's quite a bit. It's probably going to max out done with dyno if we were to do that. My also thought is, because it wouldn't be running the supercharger, we probably could make about 200 horsepower more than we were making with the same amount of boost. The problem with the turbocharger is I only have turbochargers and turbo headers. I don't have wastegates, I don't have blow-off valves, don't have any of the piping. That's a lot. And as you might remember at the beginning of this video, ATM was nice enough to let me borrow this carburetor, but I don't own it. So it's going back probably as soon as the snowstorm ends. So I don't know when I would even get a chance to do that again. If they were kind enough to let me borrow it again, I'd love to try. I would have to say though, it worked out pretty good. I told you I'd show you a spark plug. So here's a picture of the spark plug we pulled, just so you know what it looked like. Because we did actually check once after it was over. So, in conclusion, thanks for watching this. I'm glad it kind of ended the way it did. I'm glad it made 1,000 horsepower to prove that myth wrong. But I don't want people getting the idea that I think you can continually make that much power. Because honestly, a lot of people got past that myth about LSs, and then they had the same problem that small blocks like this one probably would have. You could do it. I don't know how long you could do it. So, and yes, some will obviously be running seasons, just like I'm sure that there's some small blocks that could have done the same thing. I don't know. But in conclusion, thanks for watching. Don't take this as gospel, just as a fun thing. I'm sorry I didn't blow it up. Like I said at the beginning, even before we started this, I really thought it would never make it this far. No way. I do have to thank the people that helped. So Gary Dunsworth at Dunsworth Machine, Daniel Powell for supplying the cam, ATM for letting me borrow a carburetor. Those people made more of this happen, and I'm extremely thankful. So if you want to see more of this content, the best thing you can do is like, share, subscribe. Share it as much as you can. Maybe I'll get more subscribers. Because I've said this many times, this is fun for me to do and I enjoy it. But this is not paying my bills. The head porting stuff pays the bills and pays for the dyno session. I don't make enough on YouTube to even cover the cost of what I spent on that engine. I'll go ahead and tell you that now. But I enjoy doing it, so I'm going to share it as long as I can. But this was fun. Sorry I didn't blow it up. I'm no Superman. I don't bore cast iron heads. And yes, I may try a set of stock Vortec heads on there though, because several people were like, hey, you do know that the stock LS heads would have made the same power. Can't argue that, but it's also about the same price-wise for these AFR heads. But regardless, I don't know, maybe I might try the Vortec heads on there just to see. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I'll give it a shot, but who knows? I'm going to leave you with this for you guys that made it to the end. Right now, I'm going to just put in all the graphs and dyno stuff that you could see. So you're going to have the overlays of the big blower versus small blower, NA, gas, methanol. I'm going to leave you with that in this videos. Guys, thanks for watching. Remember, I'm no Superman. I've made plenty of mistakes, and sometimes I'm an idiot, but I wasn't wrong about making 1,000 horsepower with a small block Chevy. One more thing for fun we did. We cut open the filter after it was all done. This is what it looks like. You do have some cast iron in there probably from the used rings and the fresh bore kind of mating itself, but there's 0 silver, 0 copper, none of the bearings. Things look pretty good overall, especially for the first oil change. Because no, we didn't do break-in oil, change oil, and putting fresh stuff in. Nope, same oil.